Hey everybody, Jamie here from Flow Genome Project, and welcome to Freaky Friday. Freaky Friday. So this one is a subset or a recurring edition of kind of a riff that we've been loosely calling Recapture the Rapture. So said another way, why should the WingNuts, why should all the crazy bastards out there in the world have the last word on how this all goes down for all of us? So that's kind of the inquiry and reflection. I think the simplest thing to do will just be kind of starting. So welcome. If you're just joining, go ahead and turn on your sound. Turn on your sound for to be able to participate in the conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. And we're just going to kind of jump in. So again, topic is Freaky Friday. That means this is off the reservation of strict high-performance neuroscience, et cetera, with a few more cultural, socio-political implications, applications. So fundamentally expanding these frameworks of like how to hack or optimize ourselves into, okay, if that, then so what? And how do we engage, interact, and do what's next, architect culture from here, from these places and spaces. So with that frame, okay, on my mind, I'll tell you what kicked it over most recently. I was listening, we were screening a potential stand-up comic named Duncan Trussell, I think, and he happened to have Joe Rogan on his podcast, and between them, they were just talking about the use of the word God. And that it really was just a placeholder for this sort of, that sort of ineffable, highest level alpha and omega experience, which is sometimes personified or deified or reified, but is actually an interior and exterior state of our own waking awareness and perspective taking, ... Or you can just go G-O-D and have that kind of placeholder for it. And what was interesting is they were talking about, well, why can't we reclaim that? Reclaim that notion that we might not be our very own. That's our crazy little golden retriever puppy dog, by the way, who is whip smart. I mean, almost like Planet of the Apes after the injection smart, and is rocking our world. So just one second, let me just see. Julie, would you please help me with our little buzzsaw? Thank you. So the question became, why can't we reclaim what is now seen as a religious or fundamentalist term with a whole sort of meme stack, fundamentally like interpretations of events or concepts baked into it. Therefore, if you speak of these terms, it's not ours, right? And there's a degree of needing to reclaim it or reintegrate it into broader swaths of society and culture beyond just, who would be devoted, even fundamentalist believers of any stripe. So the question becomes, how do we reclaim a sort of a sense of deliberate or intentional eschatology, literally talking about end times, or at the very least accelerating to a serious inflection point of novelty, not all of it potentially pleasant, right? So how do we, particularly when it comes to skillfully cultivating moments of ecstasis, there's moments where we step out of ourselves, and typically, because of the neurochemistry, I won't bog you guys down. It's kind of in our books and stuff that's coming out soon. But because of the neurochemistry, because of what happens neuroanatomically, because of our respiratory endocrine systems, this whole stack of neurobiology, we tend to have moments of heightened information, pattern recognition, data apprehension, and comprehension. And so we get much more of the data field. We also, in time, interpret that often becomes inspiration. Oh shit, the euphoria, the dopamine rush of novel or lateral connections, additional insights and perspectives. So yay. And then the question of what to do about it after that. Now, if we're cultivating those states on a regular basis, right, we are beginning to, as I said, the eschaton, there's a term for it in even psychedelic research, which is scatesthesia, which is that when, pharmacologically, when people are getting to those states beyond themselves, regardless of the mechanism, it could be yoga, it could be meditation, it could be action sports, it could be a near-death experience, right? It could be smart tech, transcranial magnetic stuff. It doesn't really matter. There's 1,000 different ways to kind of pick the lock of ecstasis. And now that we have many, many more of them, because they used to be, right, siloed, closely held and guarded, garbled with a whole bunch of additional mythological and cultural kind of accretion around the actual functional techniques of ecstasy. Well, now we've got them all, and we've pretty much got the source code. I mean, think about what can you order to your very own home just from Amazon. So think of all the different media assets, books, films, videos, hard goods, right, raw materials. What can you order just from Amazon these days? Right, as far as tools for understanding and hacking consciousness. I mean, just from that one, URL, right, you can blow yourself sky high 17 times over. So we are now at this place. We have access to these experiences that take us to non-ordinary states of consciousness that are often highly information rich. Right? And we always make a pledge, hey, we're going to stay content neutral. We are not going to tell anybody who's learning or training with us what it's all supposed to mean. We're saying, conduct the experiment, right? Gather your own data, see what you see. Now, the trick comes is what happens when we start actually getting to the far shore, and it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain sort of anthropological observer neutrality, because you become a participant in your own imaginally generated experiment. And at some point, we need to sort of, when people start reporting back from those further frontiers, what do they notice? One of those things is quite often a sense of what's next. Right? So there's two things that happen. You can kind of get a sense of anamnesis, or almost deja vu. This is sort of timeless and ancient. I've already lived or thought or felt this 1,000 times in some past time space. And then there's also apprehension, and that's that eschatasthesia, that I can look forwards in time, and I'm also seeing a chain of probabilities and causations kind of just here at Indra's net of the probability space, right? The quantum foam, whatever the analogy or metaphor is, and let's not kid ourselves that they are a little more than that at this point. No sooner, if you have more than half a dozen really smart physicists having completely different theories as to the way the universe actually works, then it's all up for grabs. Right? It's all up for grabs, and it's fundamentally best guess. And it may be like that old parable of King Solomon that had the prophetic dream one night, and he didn't know what it meant. So he invited the 8 wisest men in the kingdom to come and give him interpretations. And every single one of the interpretations came true. Right. So, and another example, we were guiding, we were mountain guiding in Tibet and Nepal, and ultimately got to sneak up the backside of Mount Everest to some past where Mallory's body was, in these amazing medieval meditation caves. But when we were in Lhasa, coming through Lhasa, we went to the Potala Palace, the original home of the Dalai Lama, and they have these amazing prayer wheels outside, and you spin them. And we wanted to be respectful and observe the right etiquette. And it was, you need to circumambulate, you need to go around these things counterclockwise. And then somebody, in fact, it was our Tibetan mountain guide friend, so he was hiding with a false passport, pretending to be a Nepalese Sherpa, but in fact he was part of the Tibetan resistance. And then he told us, but the ancient Bonpa, the shamans of Tibet, so the OG Tibetan religion, those guys do it clockwise. Right? So you realize very quickly that all these, the role of mind in these non-ordinary states becomes fluid, plastic, and co-creative. So that is a rather, I would imagine, and if anybody feels like asking questions or just hitting a pause button and just saying, hey buddy, rewind and define, happy to. But back to the story, which is, so we get to the information layer, we have these ecstatic experiences, we perceive many more patterns and connections, and we find ourselves on the far shore of intersubjective meaning making, i.e. shit's getting real. So then the question is which reality, once you hold a multi-perspectival stance of I'm on the dashboard, or the balcony, right, and I'm no longer wed to any single egoic narrative perspective, then you start having to run some relatively efficient multi-perspectival GPS coordinates. You have to kind of be able to log, okay, in that particular thought experiment or this particular thought experiment, what is my perspective? What are my assumptions and beliefs? What are the cultural context? What's the whole wrapper of that data point? Right? Now the difference between, we're getting back to Recapture the Rapture, the difference between that doorstep onto the far shore of meaning making as to what's going on in a sort of eschatological sense, the idea of an increasing movement to novelty, right, that we should potentially be paying attention to. Most, in fact, almost all cultures I'm aware of any scale are singular perspectival cultures. They're monophasic. They take a locked perspective. This is the way things are, right? So most quote-unquote religious believers, there hasn't been the emergence of higher level, developmentally staged appropriate collective mass religions, right? So our big organized religions are operating several clicks down the food chain, right? It's sometimes in patriarchal structures, dominator hierarchies, mythological thinking, you know, all sorts of relatively lower level cultural expressions. While you can still fully honor the integrity of them as institutions, you can also critique them developmentally and understand, you know, let's not mince words about the levels and spheres of care and concern they include and incorporate. So recapture the rapture fundamentally means taking back the end of times from the fundamentalist whack jobs. And I say that straight up. When did they get to corner the market on not only how this goes down, but why it matters and what we care about and the stances we're prepared to take. So that's fundamentally it. And when you have multiple browser windows open, and when you're not collapsed in a given cultural or egoic narrative, you're like, oh shit, it's not which one of these is going down, right? I mean, was Obama the matria and the false teacher, right? Was, you know, is Israel and Zion the seat of it all unwinding, ISIS kind of thing? So you've got some fundamentalist Christians that kind of think so. Like you can map all these, the tech singularity, the simulation. Is there a difference? I mean, can Silicon Valley nerds even separate the two at this point? So the point being is not which of these is going to go down, because you can basically pop up into the information layer and you can see, right, how these things could all go down, each and every one of them. And sometimes you get this sense of them being overlaid. So it's basically like filters on the ground nature of being that are all being overlaid simultaneously, and you can see different people having different responses to different events in the same shared time and space. So just like this election, which was a total shit show of clashing and overlapping and whacked out perspectives that were irreconcilable, because nobody was getting to a shared data sample at the bottom. Right? If this is actually what we see, this is what's true, and now let's make our meaning and interpretations from that. So what it seems to be happening, or here's a working model that lets us hold open more of these browser windows, pay more attention, and potentially more creatively intervene and co-create and or stop if needed, which is that they're all going down. That every single mythic and religious and philosophical and socioeconomic, geopolitical probability, it's like we're getting sucked down the drain of time and space. You know, it's almost as if everything's getting pulled together. And people will increasingly animate their given reality tunnels. It will trigger all of their mythic thinking, all of their reactive responses, all of their consolidating of in-groups and out-groups. Right? And people will be held, and by the way, this is including The Matrix, this is including Star Wars, this is including Star Trek, it's including, I mean, those all sprang from human minds, right? No place else are these things originating, right? So include our fiction and our nonfiction, include the real and include the ephemeral, but just know, potentially, thought experiment, right? It's just all getting sucked down the drain, and so we're not going to have the rapture or the singularity. It's going to be this sort of intertwingularity. You know, it'll be every single one of these animating and coming online and even getting sort of hyper expressed. And my hunch is, and I have no idea if this is true, but it would be a fucking good story if so, would be that the joke's on us, and that what flag we're flying, what badge we're wearing, actually turns out to not be the real deal at all. And it'll really come down to people who are drawn to freedom, to love, to courage, and then the people who come from fear or control. And it won't matter actually which flag I flew. It'll matter where I'm sourcing from. And that would kind of make sense, right? I mean, you would think that in the grand cosmic soup, that our fabric, you know, our externals wouldn't matter much. So the question then becomes, if so, then what? And this is, I mean, our content manager probably should have brick on this. I should have saved this and broken it out into probably, you know, couple of months of riffs, but here it is, which is well, I think it's really like, at what point do biohackers, at what point do optimizers, at what point do like Dolce Vita, large livers and ballers decide, hey, I've sampled enough of this. I'm good. And now is time for me to engage the world, and to engage it without distraction, not the both and, like, oh yeah, I'd love my suburban life of material comfort, and effortless privilege. And I actually say, fuck it. I can no longer stand by. And I've been thinking so much about this lately. It's the, Jonah, right, in the Old Testament. He's a successful businessman, and Yahweh says, go fix Nineveh. And he's like, fuck that, I can't. I got to skip town, right? He wants to dodge it because he's got things going. And then in the New Testament, it's like, Jesus goes walking around, finds those brothers at the lake, and he's like, I literally think, and I don't know whether this is like a Sunday school edition or it's the real deal, but I think that they even just bought new boats, or they just had a really big harvest. There was some like signifier of abundance right there and now in the material realm. And then Jesus is like, put down your nets, come and be fishers of men. And at that point, that's what I'm wondering about these days. I'm wondering about time frame on all of this, because one of the things we talk about in Stealing Fire is hey, it's not about you, and it's not about now, and that's that eschatology, that sense of this imminent unfolding. And so many people have got hoodwinked by that in the past, right? The end is nigh, the end is nigh. They're all wrong, every last one of them, including my 2012ers, including 2000 Y2Ks, you name it. But at what point? At what point do we feel called, particularly when we're cultivating and practicing with ecstasis, right? When we have these moments where we are blessed to be able to set aside our workaday burden selves and step up and stand true, what do we see? What's there? And that is obviously unique for each of us. But I have to think that there is an inflection point where we can only go to the wishing well, we can only skim the cream so many times without acting on it, without like honoring the gift and the burden of that, and standing true and tall beside each other. So that's the hope. That would be my hope, is that the world breaks everyone. That's what Hemingway said, right? He said, some are stronger in the broken places. And if we can cultivate ecstasis, not to get our rocks off, not to rage and lose ourselves, unknowingly or unwillingly, but to do it deliberately, on purpose, for a goal of like maximum mending and integration, because it's just efficient, right? It's just efficient. And from that place of like remembering what we forgot, knowing who we are, and trusting exactly how this all plays out, that we can come back to this middle part and be fearless. It's like Day After Tomorrow, whatever that movie was with Tom Cruise and what's her bucket, that English girl. Right, constantly coming back to life, and then ultimately, like over time, multiple iterations becoming ninja. So we can run those traps. We can start playing with a polyperspectival, it's so beat to hell in New Age land, but fundamentally a polychronic quantum epistemology. Like multiple timescapes, multiple strains and strands of connection and causation, and we're holding ourselves open and potentially omnipresent throughout, while rooted here in this 3D meat suit. And that's all fundamentally learnable and trainable. And I think it's not just for shits and giggles. My deepest hunch, or at least this is, it's Freaky Friday, so we get to do this, step out a little bit and ponder the yonder. But my hope is there's an injunction included. It feels that way. It certainly feels that way. It feels like Amazing Grace, or that even older spiritual, that one that Enya did at some point. How can I keep from singing? Which is just that the sort of broke open beauty of this whole thing, and the beauty in the being fucking beaten with batons and tear gas, the beauty of giving birth, the beauty of dying of old age, or in a fucking car wreck, or on a battlefield, and the beauty of art and the beauty of song and the beauty of all of it. Because like we get dialed on that, we remember exactly what makes us tick and what we're here to do. And then there is this bit of fearlessness, and the sense of it is all done. And once it's all done, then the only curiosity is to come back here in this specific moment and offer like art. What is the most beautiful way for me to play with this moment and express my essence in it fully? And that could include, like hands up, don't shoot. That could include civil acts of profound courage and commitment. It could include private acts of deep celebration and communion as families, as neighborhoods. But that's fundamentally, it's where are we in the timescape? How close are we to the hockey stick of inflection, of novelty, at which point, right, all prior bets are off. I mean, there's so many sci-fi movies and future movies where there's some collapse and then I used to be a doctor, I used to be a teacher, and then everybody reinvents their roles, blah, blah, blah. That even happened, interestingly, down in Mississippi. Burners Without Borders, the contingent of Burning Man folks, rocked down there because Katrina happened within the same time that Burning Man was going on, and they found a couple of small rural-ass towns, no FEMA, nobody even really knowing they're on the map, barely. And within 24 or 36 hours, the entire power structure of that community shifted. And the mayor, who turned out to be a chinless wonder of a low-grade politician, had no stroke. And the guy who owned the hardware store had a backhoe, a generator, and an ice machine, right, became the dawn of that community. So that's a very vivid graphic example of these kind of sudden inflection points. But it wouldn't take much, right? In 08, 09, when, I don't know what happened, I don't quite remember the intervention, but something happened across the southeast, maybe it was a pipeline break, and there were basically gas shortages. And we were driving through Austin, Texas, and there was big on the highway signs like, do not drive to Houston. Do not. And there was no goods and services, all the hotels were packed, and this was true across probably 4 or 5 states. So you realize, okay, that didn't take much. So if and when, like how do we all strike this balance? Now I'll leave on this, guys, because I want to jump into our weekend. But it's the question of high probability, low consequence events, right? Like the mail coming tomorrow, and low probability, high consequence events, structural breaks. Either ontological, like, whoa, shit, the entire universe doesn't operate the way I thought it did, or simply logistical, right? Oh, the roads are closed and there's no more Wonder Bread at the store. This is where having a multi-perspectival reality can be really cool, because you can spend time in non-ordinary ecstatic states. You can gain the information and make the connections. You can hold it and code it provisionally when you come back to this working realm, and then you can just finally basically trust but verify. Right? So pay attention to what's going around, try and anticipate trends, try and unwind thinking errors and cognitive biases, i.e. the frog in the boiling water, or the cautionary tale of Pompeii. Like, who were those fuckers sitting at their breakfast table reading the newspaper when Pompeii erupted? Like, it didn't just come out of nowhere. So keep that open as a browser window and do the work we need to expeditedly. So I always kick myself in the ass. And every time I get to like high energy space, I sort of scan my system and it's like, oh, I'm operating at a fraction of the percent I know I could be. If I was taking this for real, and if I was training my ass off and doing it with love and concern, not like beating myself up because I wasn't enough or less than or whatever, or like not fully accepting, like fully accept, fully dial, and train and eat well and be in right relationship and experience the natural world and make love and music and dance and great food. Like, not hard stuff. Like, we've been doing this forever. And we just got abstracted and commodified out of feeding the holy, So that's it, guys. I think I will wrap on that. Thank you for all the wonderful hearts and acknowledgments along the way. I would love to explore with anybody that's interested this process of like reclaiming the holy. And it doesn't need to be superstitious or mythological or attached to a bunch of other fish stories. Just, hey man, hell yes. Bow down to what's around us and acknowledge, like, if I were to take a stand, because a buddy of mine, major player in the whole drone space, right, and he's totally geeking out right now on like, hey, maybe like full-on transcendent hypothesis, singularity experiment, like we'll upload our consciousness and then we'll have the sight and sound of sort of the gods, right? We'll be able to fly, zoom, go underwater, do all these kind of things. And I honestly felt a little uncomfortable with it, because I was like, man, you know what? I just don't know if in like my core of my being, I feel comfortable abandoning this little experiment we've been gifted with on this particular little blue marble. And I may turn out to be hopelessly naive and romantic, but I'd love to take a stand for these lifetimes in these skins on this earth. You know, and it may turn out that there's more to come. I mean, who was it? Stephen Hawking just today announced, I think, that he gave us 1,000 years of living exclusively on this planet, unless or until we would need to have found some plan Bs elsewhere. But man, I'd love to take a stand for that millennium and just say, let's fix this and be good to each other as we do so. So, love you guys. Thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Yeah, and I hope that was of some mild use to somebody someplace. So be well, everybody, and have a kick-ass weekend. We'll see you again tomorrow.